Your brain is one of the most vital organs in your body. Have you ever had a concussion? Well, you, my friend, have had a mild traumatic brain injury, and that sounds a lot more intense than just a concussion. Now, the concussion protocol has changed over time. When we think of concussions, we think about football players. I myself had a cheerleading accident. There are people who have had really bad falls or car crashes, whiplash, and these can impact our lives typically between a few weeks, a couple days to weeks, but in some cases it might be post-concussion syndrome, which turns into months, 3 to 6 months, and even beyond that time frame. What I've learned as a speech therapist and as someone who has experienced a mild traumatic brain injury, an MTBI, life can take on a whole new set of challenges just by one blow to the head. Your brain is one of the most vital organs in your body. It is in charge of how you interpret and perceive the world. It's in charge of how you execute and plan tasks. It's in charge of language. It's in charge of vision. Some of those overlap. I'm sorry. I'm just listing how important it is. When we are looking at concussions, we often think of headache, but so much more takes place. For example, a lot of us might experience nausea, dizziness, ringing in the ears. We might also experience some irritability, fatigue, some mental health concerns like depression, anxiety, outbursts. Not just the headache that most people depict it as. For me and my concussion, my story takes a number of forms. I was in a really bad cheerleading accident in 2012. A girl fell on my head and I did not experience symptoms until day 3. And I was studying for my science test and I was like, oh my goodness, I literally cannot focus. I felt nauseous. My vision was going in and out as I was trying to read. And I was like, okay, something is not right. A week went by. I went to my physician and he said, I have a concussion. I'm out of cheerleading for a week and then I could go back. I went back and I got hit. My body was hit, but that's part of the nervous system. So that in itself was like another blow. And I suddenly forgot my routine that we had been practicing and I just knew something was not right. I went to a sports medicine doctor and I was diagnosed with a mild traumatic brain injury, the concussion, and I was put on I wouldn't say academic probation, but I was given a 504 plan, which is a type of individualized education program. And then I was told I needed to take the semester off to rest. I was then diagnosed with post-concussive syndrome, which is when your symptoms persist for 3 to 6 months. And honestly, I think I do have long-term impacts because of it. With rehab, I wish I saw a speech therapist. Speech therapy works on language as well as executive functioning and how we accomplish our tasks. Language comprehension is how we understand language. This could be following directions. And so what might look like we have to break down what we hear into smaller pieces. This might affect our working memory, which is a subcategory of auditory memory. And with that, maybe we have to write down everything we hear. When I was in school, I picked up the compensatory behavior, so kind of like to help me excel in school. I had to write down every note. I would read every book I had to read for school, and then next to it I would have to reread it and go over it with notes. I would highlight it and then go over it with notes, and that would help it stay in my head for a longer period. That tapped into my long-term memory. Next, we have language expression, and this is how we use language. Something that may be impacted is just how we connect words. You might have more grammatical errors in your sentence. You might have problems with word retrieval. For example, like you want to say a word, but you don't know what it is. Something that we would work on with you would be synonyms and antonyms, or coming up with circumventing to describe the word to help your communication partner understand what you're trying to say. Those are some of the tactics. We would also use visualization to help you picture what the word means. Executive dysfunction or executive functioning skills. And I love this topic. I am fascinated by the processes involved in task execution. The first is attention. Now, you might work with a psychologist when collaborating on a student with this. But with attention, we want to make sure that we're using modifications that help that student excel in a setting. So your student might have difficulty with inhibition, so they're not focusing on stimuli that's not needed for that task. So think about like when you are in a room and people are loud and you can't focus. That's kind of what it's hinting at. Kind of going into that working memory, you're given a couple numbers that you have to quickly multiply. Are you able to retain those numbers in your head? Are you able to carry over? All of that stuff. When we have a concussion or a brain injury, it's harder to do so. So once again, writing it down or visualizing it in your head are two really good compensatory measures. And then also using that muscle, trying to get it down through rehab, through actually running through the process. As the next would be execution of skills. So with that, we have planning. What do you have to do and how are we going to go about it? It's very interesting because I read an published article on how visualizing the steps it takes, writing it down, and then using positive motivation like self-talk to accomplish each chunk of the task can help you accomplish your goals. In my head, I'm like, ooh, that's manifestation, right? While you are still executing that task, another thing is making sure that you're checking in with yourself. Self-regulation. Are your emotions taking over? Are you motivated? Do you need to switch out something? Do you need to do a little more research? Is it taking longer than you thought? These are some questions, and then regulating your emotions and having that adaptability to switch tasks can help you accomplish the task at hand. And then last, this is something that I've talked about in previous videos, but metacognition. Metacognition I like to use when we're working with self-regulation and accomplishing tasks. So if I have like a worry, I will write it down on a piece of paper. And what this does is it puts it at a distance. It uses that frontal lobe, that logical part of the brain, to see that emotion from that primitive animal brain and to see what's going on. You might write down, I'm so nervous I'm going to fail this test. And then you might see it on the paper and think that's not true because I know I could study and I could work towards that end goal of passing. I had another thing I wanted to say. Oh, like I said, outbursts and irritability and depression are common with our concussions, MTBIs, brain injuries, and so making sure that you're working with a psychologist or a social worker is imperative to student success. And then something that I like to just consider as a provider, nervous system regulation. Now, people who have experienced a brain injury, their nervous system is a lot more sensitive. So you fluctuate between that homeostasis and fight or flight, or even freeze, or you might fawn. Now, I have a whole other video about the subcategories in a podcast, so I'll link that below. But essentially, if you see a student who is frozen and has task paralysis, they might be overwhelmed. Their system might be telling their body they have to shut down because of all the stressors at hand. Knowing that as a clinician can help you achieve their goals and mediate any stressors. And then again, working with someone who understands trauma-informed care, neuro-resilient care, resilient-centered care. There's so many terms now. That can go a long way in making sure you or your child or your loved one meets their goals. Now, I want to just add one more caveat. I did have vestibular symptoms, so ringing in the ear and dizziness. So, for example, I would try to walk and look at my phone, but I couldn't. I would get so sick that nausea would seep in. And even to this day, I see people walking on their phones on the treadmill, and I just can't do that. My vision goes X, Y, and Z. And something that is implicated with head injuries, what we call BPPV, and I'm just going to put the actual name on here because I'm not even going to try and say it. Benign posture, I don't know. And so essentially what you could do is go see an audiologist or a physical therapist that specializes in vestibular therapy. Now, I saw a vestibular therapist and he was awesome. We did a lot of walking back and forth and making sure I stood up in a straight line. We did a lot of standing and looking at different dots and looking at fingers. And we would, of course, stop whenever I felt kind of sick. But for the most part, I was really eager to accomplish this. Because it's like, you would never think. It did get better, but sometimes when I am really fatigued or really tired, I feel it come back. Another recommendation that I would have too, beyond just neurologist, a sports medicine doctor, is checking in for an audiologist. Sometimes there are implications where your one ear might be favored than the other. There might be a discrepancy, and that could cause some headaches or difficulties when communicating. And sometimes when we are looking at auditory memory or working memory, we might have more involvement of the temporal lobe, the region that's involved with processing hearing. And so if there's damage there, that might be why you can't retain information. And just working with an audiologist to strengthen your auditory processing skills. I think that concussions are getting more light recently, and I'm really excited about it. I know I have a podcast coming up, and at this point, I believe I'm going to post it after this video. I love, again, talking about speech therapy, neuroscience, and chronic conditions. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and feel free to tune back to Natalie Marie SLP. I'll see you next time.